It's Thursday, time to talk with Dr. Christian Kopff, University of Colorado in Boulder. Today in segment one, we're going to talk about the blame game that's been going on several fronts on the national scene. In segment two, we'll talk about the new Glenn Beck book, Conform, which is about Common Core.
It's time for the Newsmaker Show on News Talk AM 1480 WLEA. Here's Kevin Torres.
Again, Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran today. Dr. Kopff, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Dr. Kopff, the Rush is on to blame Rush and the Tea Party, Fox, Alex Jones, and others for the Las Vegas shootings because the suspects in the Las Vegas police killing case were at Cliven Bundy's ranch as protesters, and Rush and others talked about Cliven Bundy. Limbaugh also getting blamed for the tragic school shooting in Oregon. Here's what Alex Jones says about all that.
They're now in the news today saying Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Alex Jones are behind the shooting in Las Vegas with no proof. They're coming after us, and if we don't all hang together, we'll hang separate.
Dr. Kopff, your reaction to the blame game in this instance?
Well, yes, the problem with the blame game in this instance is it's part of a pattern, which we've seen going back years, and they just start off blaming, and most of the time there's absolutely no evidence for it. And obviously, if each and every shooting you start off that way, you'll eventually find somebody with some connection. But it makes it impossible to have a serious discussion about principle when there's always the emotional, personal attack, which goes back to the great Saul Alinsky of Chicago, who told the left, always personalize, never allow a discussion of principle. And it's upsetting because you cannot have free consensual institutions based on debate when half the people won't debate and always personalize.
The president reacted to the news of the recent shooting saying that there's no place else in the world where this happens like this, and that America should be ashamed for not being able to address the problems, meaning gun control. This is the president on CNN.
We're the only society, we're the only developed country on earth where this happens. And it happens now once a week. And it's a one-day story. There's no place else like this. Our levels of gun violence are off the charts. There's no advanced, developed country on earth that would put up with this.
Dr. Kopff, I was talking to a reporter friend of mine the other night, and he said he sees more anti-SAFE Act, which is the gun control rules in New York State, anti-SAFE Act signs than any other movement around here. Wanted to get your take on what the president said there. He pretty much is calling for gun control, isn't he?
Yes, he doesn't want to use the words because they don't poll well. But we have this other side that we're the only place where this happens. And let me just respond, because you mentioned the popularity of this way of talking in upstate New York. Believe me, it's just as unpopular in Colorado. If the Democratic Party gets in trouble, Colorado this fall, it'll be over guns. It'll be over what Americans think is indispensable for freedom and has been considered so going back to the Bill of Rights and back to George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights. Secondly, there was a terrible massacre of school kids in Norway just a few years ago. England has had several such atrocities, both with guns but also, tragically, with swords, with people chopping a person's head off. But here's the thing that irks me about it is we're always being compared to Canada, and Canada has something like 1.5 murders per 100,000, and I can't remember America's exact number, but it's 4 point something, edging toward 5. And they say, look, we're on the boundaries there, and they have gun control, and they have no death penalty, and doesn't that prove that we need to get rid of guns and get rid of the death penalty? It turns out, I've been doing research on this, there's another country that borders the United States besides Canada. It's to the south. It's a country called Mexico. And their average in death last time it was measured, which I think was 2 years ago, was 22 per 100,000. I didn't say 2.2, 22 per 100,000, and that was down 2 from a couple of years ago. So they're actually getting better. And they have gun control. They have no death penalty. There are things about national culture that have to be confronted. But we do not have a very high death penalty considering the diversity of our population. And there's certainly no excuse for disarming innocent people and law-abiding people because criminals use guns. It's a reason to punish criminals and punish them severely, and that's what the president and Mr. Holder don't want to do. They want to release one-third of the people in jail.
Second Amendment supporters also point out that in a number of these horrible situations that have happened, the people at the scene who do have guns prevent the violence from getting worse.
Yes, you have both guns, and even in the case of the Seattle shooting, pepper spray. I mean, people who've armed themselves somehow. Now, I don't want to replace guns with pepper spray, but people that are ready to defend themselves, and people who have guns almost always practice. They've thought about it. They've thought about self-defense. That's what we need more of, is Americans able to defend themselves, not disarming them, because almost all of these killings, not all of them, but almost all, take place in places which are gun-free. And there's much more violence in gun-free locations. It's interesting, they walk into military bases a couple of times, which are idiotically gun-free. Nobody's walking into a police station, because police stations are far from gun-free.
Another example of the blame game, soldiers who criticize Sergeant Bo Bergdahl are being called, well, lots of names. One White House aide referred to them as a group of psychopaths. He said, how do we know they're not all psychopaths, the people who came out against Bergdahl? That was a lot of soldiers. That's kind of an odd thing for him to be diagnosing long distance there. And a lot in the liberal media have been coming to the defense of Bergdahl in similar ways. This audio here from the Sean Hannity show, he collected, he made a collage of reporters attacking anyone who criticized Bergdahl.
I've had a few aides describe it to me as, we didn't know that they were going to swift boat Bergdahl. And Matt,
it was a PR campaign by Republicans.
I wish Republicans were that good.
Look, who sought to muddy the waters, because that's all they do, Candy. All they do is focus their vitriol, their rage against this president.
So pretty much in that one, the talking heads are denouncing anyone who criticized Sergeant Bergdahl as intolerant. Your take on that one, Dr. Kopff?
Well, this is one of these situations that's very hard to understand. These are people who knew him, worked with him, and were in the same situation he was in. And most of us have not been there. Their analysis is based upon personal knowledge of the situation by people who are carefully selected. We don't have a draft army. We have a volunteer army. We can turn people down. And these people who have appeared on various shows, their articulateness is quite impressive. You see these, jaywalking things, the average American trying to talk, and these guys are very articulate. They can handle all kinds of technical things, and it's very clear in their minds what was expected of people and what Bergdahl did not do. And to have people who have no understanding of these things, why don't they criticize people doing calculus and astronauts? Because they have just as much competence to criticize them. And, of course, then judging their sanity is really way beyond the pall. There's absolutely no reason to think that these well-trained, articulate, and intelligent men are insane. On the contrary, they're the sane ones in the country, as far as I can tell. They're the ones asking us to behave sanely and fairly and responsibly.
Dr. Kopff, on this blame game thing we've seen this week, is anything new here, or is this something that's been going on for a long time with the blame game?
It's interesting. I'm here in Seattle as part of a conference sponsored by the Intercollegiate Studies Institute about traditions of liberty, and I regret to say that the blame game has become one of the traditions of our country now. It's not new. It goes back to the great Saul Alinsky, the radical, Chicago radical of the 1940s. So we are talking about generations of practicing this systematically to discourage serious debate, to move away from questions of principle, and to concentrate on the personality. And unfortunately, although I am a traditionalist and I love tradition, this is a tradition we could do without.
We're talking with Dr. Christian Kopff, University of Colorado in Boulder, and when we get back, we'll talk about the new Glenn Beck book, Conform. Back on the Newsmaker Show, Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Dorn with our regular Thursday guest, Dr. Christian Kopff. Glenn Beck has a new book out about education and Common Core specifically. Here's a clip from Glenn Beck's audiobook. It's not him reading it, but it's a clip from the book, the audiobook, the audio version of Conform. Idea being that the new educational program called Common Core wants a bunch of non-thinky zombie conformists who will just who will be trained to do just what they're told.
The Oregon Department of Education website describes Common Core as 21st century skills for 21st century jobs and assures parents that the standards will prepare our students for career success in the rapidly changing world of work. I included that quote because it gets to the heart of what this Common Core experiment is really about. Creating workers, not thinkers. I can already hear the groans from progressives. Come on, you can't blame Common Core for trying to modernize public education. Creating a bunch of thinkers might have been the right mission back in the days of wooden teeth and powdered wigs, but we live in a global economy now, and our kids have to compete in it. Get with the times. That premise is completely false. As Glenn Reynolds explains in his book, The New School, the purpose of the K-12 system that America adopted in the mid-1800s was actually imported from Prussia and was specifically intended to produce industrial workers.
Dr. Kopff, is the Beck book right there that the government wants to educate people in Common Core to be someday obedient employees?
Well, that basically is correct. We understand that there are a lot of parts of the Common Core that are meant to concentrate on problems of the inner city, raise standards in poor areas. You know, there are all kinds of specific details of it. But the general thing is to move education away from education for citizenship, which means you have to be able to think, you have to speak grammatically, think logically, and express yourself convincingly. Move away from citizenship and move toward jobs. And when you hear them promoted, it's this is going to get people jobs in the global marketplace. And there's no discussion of the role of public education as training kids for, responsible freedom. I mean, the freedom of a citizen. And it's ultimately, it's the principles behind it. We can debate individual, ways of doing math and ways of doing reading and this or that book. But it's the general principle is a principle for vocational training for workers, not liberal education to produce citizens of a free society.
Here's what Beck's new book, Conform, says about data mining, which is the collecting of information about students. In this clip, Beck's audiobook quotes Arnie Duncan, Education Secretary, talking about data mining.
Hopefully, someday we can track children from preschool to high school and from high school to college and college to career. We must track high-growth children in classrooms to their great teachers and great teachers to their schools of education. Arnie Duncan, U.S. Secretary of Education.
Dr. Kopff, you're in education. What, if anything, have teachers done up to this point in time to track or monitor students, besides keeping track of their grades and keeping them after school when they misbehave? Is this something that guidance counselors have been doing all along, talking to the teachers about what career which students should go to, or is the Common Core introducing sort of a new concept?
I would say, as you've hinted, it's not a new concept. This is what guidance counselors do. It allows them to suggest that students, take different paths, some to a liberal arts school, some to a technical school, some to community college. This is based upon teachers sending the evidence in, which is largely grades, but there are other things as well. What extracurricular activities there are, etc., and guidance counselors helping them. And in good schools, and we're very lucky in Boulder, our public schools are rather good, the guidance counselors do a sensational job. This is part, however, of making this systematic from K through 12. Remember, most of the work done in high schools takes ignores a lot of the early years, takes some account of middle school, and concentrates a lot on what's kid is doing in high school. This is an attempt to trace everybody all the way through, and it's part of a general movement of the government and our society to keep tabs on, what we're doing at any stage, who's telephoning whom, all the rest of these detailed activities. The fact is, bright kids, ordinary kids develop in an ordinary path, that's true. But really bright kids often develop in very unusual ways. And when you study them, and that's one of the things I like to do, is study the education of really creative people, you see that it doesn't fit a kind of pattern like that. And it's going to start privileging ordinary, smart but ordinary kids over really smart, meaning creative. I don't mean IQ, but creative people who tend to develop in ways that don't fit the ordinary patterns. That's what ends up making them so creative.
Would Common Core, this process of data mining, put the blocks to late bloomers as well?
It would definitely be. It is meant to help kids in troubled school districts, in inner cities, in poor areas, and a lot of its suggestions, I don't doubt, would be helpful for them. But it's very bad for late bloomers, and it's very bad for kids who develop in unusual ways. I've been doing work on Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings, who was a scholar. And the first time he applied for his very good school, King Edward School in Birmingham, he failed the exam. He only got it the second time. When he got in, he became an excellent student. He became too good. Not only did he do the curriculum, he taught himself a whole set of extra languages as well. Well, none of this can come up. Kids being so bright that they learn things outside of school, so you wouldn't catch that a Tolkien was developing for you, because this is meant to help kids that are in real trouble, and it's meant to also encourage solid but not especially creative people, and it's terrible for late bloomers, of course.
Here's one more audio clip from that new Glenn Beck book, Conform. This is the criticism of the state-run education. This is what Beck says Common Core advocates are saying.
States have failed, so we now need national standards. Local control is just a ruse to protect mediocrity. One way to ensure that young people develop the skills they need to compete globally is to set clear standards about what schools should teach and students should learn, and make these standards uniform across the land. Leaving such decisions to individual states, communities, and schools is no longer serving the U.S. well.
Then Beck's books go on to say that some states have dumbed things down to make testing easier, but that states have done this on the orders of national politicians like former Senator Ted Kennedy and former President George W. Bush. Dr. Kopff, your reaction to that?
The fact is, we are always being compared to little countries, or to Finland, to Shanghai, things like this, which, of course, being smaller, are able to do different things. We are a continent-wide nation. Liberals always talk about diversity, but we really are diverse. We're diverse in our ethnicity, we're diverse in our religious commitments, we're diverse in what we want out of education. And American education has, in fact, done a pretty good job of meeting the needs of that diversity. They compare exams that are made across the board, the whole United States, with countries like Finland. And you're going, this is not if you separate out the different kinds of Americans, the different interests of Americans, you see we are doing a good job. European Americans do better than Europe as a whole. Remember, Europe is not a whole. It's all the different countries have their own systems. Asian Americans and East Asian Americans do better than East Asians as a whole. We are not doing, of course we can be improved. We are not doing a bad job. We are not doing a good job for people at the bottom. And we're doing an okay job for people at the top. But Common Core is not the answer, and a national, which means a continental-wide system, is not like Europe, which does not have a continental-wide system. Each of the nations have their own. We need to stick to the states and the local community, because as a whole, they are doing a good job, while watching out for those cities and those areas that do need help. But they need help in a special way. The whole country doesn't have to be changed in order to make these improvements.
A final question for you, Dr. Kopff. The public criticism of Common Core has one effect that might not be intended. I say this on a show that is not well listened to by grade school and high school students because it's on when they're in school. But I'm wondering, the effects on students of constantly hearing criticisms of their own educational system when a student hears what they're learning is watered down or dumbed down, is that bad for the students to know that, new math or Common Core, whatever curriculum it is not the best? How would you get around that as a parent when your child is frustrated by educational changes? You don't want the kid to have a complex because the school has changed the process of the way they change. But at the same time, do you want to send total anarchists to school because they don't have any confidence in their educational system? How do you get around that as a parent?
Well, there are several ways. The parents need to be involved in their school. If they're sending the kid to public school, there are places where they can participate. If they're sending their kid to a parochial school or a private school, those people listen to parents because parents are paying the bill. So, an interested parent can, by being interested, you make a great statement to your child. You say, this matters. And, of course, you shouldn't have a totally negative view. Absolutely right. You should be enthusiastic about the good parts, and you should make reasoned criticism of the parts that are not good. Absolutely true. But I think a child that sees the parent interested learns from that education is important. And if that involves some criticism, I don't think that's bad, as long as it's part of a committed interest of the parent in the education and in the child. When it's bad is when you just get angry over one book or one curriculum and go to the board meeting and shout. That doesn't do any good. But a continued interest, that's the greatest thing a parent can do. It sends a great message to the child that they love the child and they value the education, and they're doing the best to make sure they get the best education they can.
Dr. Kopff, I want to thank you very much for joining us today.
It's been great to talk to you, Brian.
And you too, Dr. Kopff. Coming up next, NBC News on AM 1480 WLEA Hornet.